I think the two of us are maybe the only ones, or maybe there are others who have been with this summer university from the very beginning.
We are the dinosaurs in this regard.
6 or 7 years. So I'm really very glad that Andrei invited me again, although I moved from UNDP and from Bratislava. Now, the presentation that I will give you today is not at all what I used to present in the past, which was related to my work in Bratislava, so I'll try to give you something related to my current work, and I hope it will be interesting and relevant for the topic we're discussing here. This is the first time that I give this presentation, so I expect there is room for improvement, so I would encourage your feedback and questions, and let me know if you think it's not clear, or I should elaborate more on certain aspects than others. Just a quick introduction. What I'm doing now, I'm working since January at the European Commission in Brussels in a general directorate called SANCO, Health and Consumers. But the abbreviation comes from the French name, Santé et Consommateur. And the unit I'm leading is called Consumer Markets, and it's responsible mostly for research for policy purposes. So what we do is we monitor consumer conditions, consumer markets, with a view to producing evidence for policy making. And we do, we have some regular publications, which are the so-called consumer scoreboards. There are 2 types of them. We monitor specific markets, around 50 markets across the European Union from a consumer perspective, and also the general consumer conditions. We monitor e-commerce, and in particular cross-border e-commerce in the EU. We do in-depth market studies on specific markets, where through this general screening we find that there are particular problems from a consumer perspective. And more recently we are also doing something which is quite cutting edge at the international level, and I will refer to it a bit later, behavioral research. And the evidence that we're producing is supposed to inform both specific consumer policy of the European Union and of member states as well. And there is legislation, for instance, that is specifically targeted at consumers. For instance, Consumer Rights Directive, Unfair Commercial Practices Directive. Now in the pipeline we have a directive about alternative dispute resolution and a regulation about online dispute resolution. But also to inform a broad range of policies that have implications for consumers, and then it's important to have the consumer-centered evidence fed into that process. Anything you can think of, from transport policy to sustainability to agriculture to energy and so on. Now, you may wonder, why is this relevant for you? Why is the EU at all an interesting case to look at? I would say at least for 2 reasons. One is that at the international level, at least in terms of consumer issues, I'm not afraid to say that it's the entity that is the most advanced. Okay, so I often struggle with this perception within the Commission that somehow Brussels is the center of the world, which is not. But at least when it comes to consumer issues, yes, there are things that the EU can show and demonstrate to the rest of the world. But in terms of your countries, many of them, actually, and I assume you're coming mostly from Eastern Europe and Central Asia, many of them have actually some commitments to implement acquis in one way or another, EU acquis, in the context, for instance, of either association agreements or free trade agreements. just yesterday, before coming here, we were discussing the signing of free trade agreements with Caucasian countries. I think Armenia, Azerbaijan, Georgia, and their commitment to implement parts of the acquis. So things that we will be discussing here and that are listed there will, in the near future, become part of international legislation as well. And there will be monitoring. Now, what's the role of consumers in general in the economy, and then more specifically with regard to sustainability? Consumer expenditure accounts for 56% of the GDP in the European Union. And this is huge. And what does this mean? It means that consumers have a lot to say when it comes really to shaping the economic development. And our approach is not, at the Commission, is not that, you know, consumers are just there, some passive actors, but they actually have a very active role to play, especially if they are empowered. We refer to more and more to consumer empowerment, actually more than consumer protection. Consumer protection is still there, but consumers who are empowered means consumers who are proactively taking action in the market and through their decisions, day-to-day decisions on their expenditure, on what they buy, they influence the competition in the market, they influence the resource allocation. For instance, they can reward companies that are innovative, that are efficient, that meet their expectations. They can foster competition. Again, if they are empowered, if they make informed choices, if they compare offers in the market, if they are ready to switch and not just prisoners to inertia and stick, for instance, to the same provider. And these are very salient issues when it comes, for instance, to energy, to banking, switching, to telecommunications. Okay, so how can you compare your energy provider with another one if there is competition in the market and be able to switch? I mean, there are many issues around that. Also, complaining and seeking redress is very important. When consumers complain, they provide a public service beyond just, attending to their own problem. Because they send signals, they inform authorities, they put pressure on the companies. And the same when they seek redress, they punish those who do not respect the legislation. But the information component is quite crucial here. And then yes, communicating with sellers of products, providers of services, manufacturers. Sorry, there's a typo there. Also, with other consumers, increasingly we see social media being used, for instance, for consumers getting together, taking collective action, for instance. One of the cutting-edge developments is collective switching. It's quite cumbersome for individuals to switch sometimes, but when they get together, there are big economies of scale. And they can negotiate from a strong position with the service providers. They communicate with authorities, with consumer organizations, with them. Okay, sustainable consumption is, of course, a vast subject, and I'm afraid we'll barely scratch the surface today. And it's also, because it applies to so many policy areas, is an issue that is distributed among various directorates, generals, and departments, and so on. So I just listed some here, but for you to understand, these are the general directors dealing with the environment, with health and consumers, with climate change, with energy, with industries, DG Enterprise, with the internal market, with agriculture and so on, but this is not exhaustive. And just for the policy context, I listed here, but you don't have to retain that, but just as background. Some of the flagship initiatives that sort of set the main policy reference framework currently in place. This action plan of sustainable consumption and production and sustainable industrial policy, which is the master plan for the EU in this area. It was adopted, I would say unfortunately, in a way, in December 2008. The timing was not perfect deal because you know what happened. That's when the economic crisis hit. And well, the development cycle is much longer, so work had been going on for some years, but the crisis complicated in a way things, and we'll look into more detail. But what's important in this action plan is that it promotes this integrated product policy. When it looks at the products on the market, it takes an integrated approach to them, meaning both their manufacturing, their placement in the market, but also their complete life cycle, their usage, and their disposal. So looking at the environmental performance and sustainability performance in comprehensive terms. There's then an eco-design directive that had sort of two legs. It was revised, first passed in 2005, revised in 2009 for energy-related products. This is the one that mostly looks at products that use energy, like electrical appliances, but also who have an impact on the usage of energy, like housing. There is a resource efficiency roadmap adopted last year. Just recently, the consumer agenda also is part related to sustainability, to sustainable consumption. Now we expect there is ongoing work on what we call the single market for green products, which means unifying the internal market when it comes to green products by setting common standards. And in particular, and this is quite important, there is work on a harmonized methodology to calculate the environmental footprint of products and throughout their cycle. And that's quite complex because it's, it needs to capture everything from, consumption of resources to pollution to what they can then, you have to put together water and electricity and renewables and so on. This is quite complex work and it involves many industries and many stakeholders, and is led by DG Environment and many departments. And then next year we expect initiatives they are now in work. We expect adoption of sustainable food and sustainable construction. Okay, just to give you a picture of where these different things fit. Here, if you imagine a sort of Gauss distribution of products in the market when it comes to sustainability. So imagine more or less a Gauss curve, okay, something like that, with most products somewhere in the middle. And then, at this end, the ones that are less sustainable, and the other end, the far end, the ones that are more sustainable. This eco-design directive, for instance, what it aimed at is just to cut this portion of the curve. So it was something that was not very, how should I say, very sophisticated, because at that time there was no real comprehensive methodology to assess the total footprint of the products. this, what it did was to remove from the market the most unsustainable products. So that's something already. So basically, this part of the curve was amputated. Then there are initiatives targeted at the center and trying to push it towards more or better sustainability performance. For instance, energy labels that are applied to products you may have seen on refrigerators, for instance. I mean, these are instruments designed to encourage innovation and to push towards sustainability. And at that level, we're talking about issues like pricing and trading, encouraging voluntary initiatives by industry and facilitating them, producer responsibility, support to businesses who are most innovative. Also public procurement, this GPP stands for Green Public Procurement. Labeling of environmental performance and also public awareness. And then at this end, the idea is really to support those who are at this end and to encourage innovation. For instance, through labeling schemes. Now, this was on the supply side, and we'll now spend some time, the rest of the time, looking at the demand side and the role of consumers. And again, on this, I cannot cover everything, but we'll refer to some issues like energy use and food waste, among others. This is, okay, consumers' attitudes matter a lot. Okay, in this picture, you see it's from the States. People actually holding prayer vigils at the petrol stations, praying for lower prices for petrol. So this has happened in the States, where, when in recent years, when the price of petrol has gone up, this has been the popular reaction in many places. And this in the circumstances where still the price is about, the price to the consumer in the States of petrol is about half the price that we're paying in Europe, sometimes even less. But the idea that there is sort of an universal right to cheap petrol, or that that's how things should be forever. Now, I said earlier I would come back a little to the impact of the economic crisis on sustainable consumption. So what's the impact of the crisis? Is it good for sustainability or bad for sustainability? And there are arguments on both sides. Some people make the argument that by reducing economic activity, it's good. The crisis actually brings benefits to the environment, which is true to some extent. So in the short term, it does bring these indirect benefits simply by reduced economic activity. But on the other hand, what we see is that also due to the crisis, the motivation and incentives for companies to invest more into sustainability, into research and innovation in this area, into renewable energies has decreased. So for instance, the price of oil has gone down because of the crisis, reduced economic activity, reduced demand for oil, then automatically incentives to look into other sources of energy have decreased. So it's a mixed picture, and overall one can make the argument that actually the crisis has been bad for the green industry as well. It has produced a lot of uncertainty, like it has brought uncertainty in all the markets. And also for the consumer side, when we look at demand for green products from consumers, again we see a mixed picture in the context of the crisis. For instance, and this is data from the US, but you know, we assume we don't have similar studies for Europe, but we assume it must be quite similar. It shows, for instance, that in the context of the crisis, about half of the consumers report, these are just consumer surveys, so it's self-reporting. They say they buy just as many green products as before. 19% say they buy more green products than before, and 14% the opposite. This in general. In the food market, there is a special situation. We see actually a slightly reverse trend. For instance, in the UK, in the context of the crisis, for the first time in 10 years, people started to spend less on organic food. So that was, before the crisis, that was one of the fastest growing markets. And then in the context of the crisis, it declined quite significantly. Again, in the UK, we see that in the context of the crisis, people have been buying less fruits and vegetables, which is bad for sustainability. Because when it comes to diets, you probably know diets that are rich in meat and animal products have a much heavier environmental footprint than diets that are less meat intensive. Now, especially in the context of the crisis, it's not always obvious to make the choice, the more sustainable choice. Okay. So what can this sustainable choice be made easier? How can it be made the easy choice, okay, for consumers? And here we think the answer basically relies on, okay, there this formula of the 4 A's, but basically these 4 aspects are all quite important. What does affordability mean? It means that, you know, green products traditionally are more expensive and they are sort of upmarket products. Okay, if we want them to become mainstream, then they have to be more affordable. And it's also a matter of social justice, because often the poorer households are actually suffering the worst from unsustainability patterns, pollution, unhealthy diets, and so on. So it's both a matter of social justice, but also, you know, if you really want to drive the market into a more sustainable direction, then these products have to become mainstream. This can be done through different policy instruments, for instance, tax incentives and so on. But then you need to know exactly which products to encourage, and then again we're going back to having robust methodologies for assessing their performance in terms of sustainability. Availability, so they need to be available on the market. Okay, so the demand to meet the supply to meet the demand. And we see this actually, you can look at it in a rights-based approach even, the right to sustainability. Just like consumers have a right to safety, wherever you are or you buy something in the European Union, including here in Budapest or wherever, there is an assumed right to safety. Everything you buy should be safe. There are laws about this, there are guarantees. In case of problems, you have legitimate reason to complain and to seek redress, and so on. So there are guarantees for consumers. There should be equally these guarantees for sustainability. So the sustainable choice has to be available, and especially the most unsustainable products should be just removed from the market. That's something that the eco-design directive was aiming at. Then also the third A is attractiveness. They need to be attractive as well. You know, if you have to choose between the ugly tomato and the nice-looking tomato, it's not always easy to choose the ugly one. They need to deliver. Okay, remember my experience just a few days ago. I was looking for something to help me unplug a pipe, okay, in my bathroom. And there, I don't know, for some reason in Belgium, you have different products for this, but there they make it so salient which ones are environment friendlier than others, that you had basically the options where there was one which had in a big print sulfuric acid on it, like this one contains sulfuric acid. Some other one which was also containing some very aggressive substance, which I guess all of them that you would normally find contained, but that was made quite salient. And then one that was labeled as eco-friendly, and it was with enzymes and so on. So I bought that one. But then guess what? It didn't really work. So it has to work. It has to deliver. So it's if they are not working, then forget about it. And then awareness. And awareness of consumers is not as easy as it sounds, because we actually know that awareness itself is not sufficient to encourage consumers to make the sustainable choices. Okay. And I'll come to that, to consumer behavior and how information is absorbed by consumers. But basically the idea is awareness by itself is important, but it's not enough. Actually, all these four elements are important. You can think of them as the four legs of a table. You need all of them to make the table stand. But yeah, in particular in awareness, there are also other aspects at play, like social norms and cultural aspects. Now, and here I come, this is a very crowded slide, but I'll try to go through it quickly. But it's quite interesting, actually. And I mentioned this is a relatively new development at the international level in policy making. Looking at trying to understand actual behavior. And this applies to consumers as well as to citizens in general. You can apply it to any policy area. So what we see is a shift of paradigm in how policymakers in the more advanced countries see or look at the impact of their policies on people's behavior. The traditional model, assumes, for instance, for the consumer, assumes that the consumer is a rational actor, is self-interested, informed. So basically the pattern is, the model is that the consumer tries to get information, compare, and make a rational choice that is in his or her benefit. But this we see, this model has been questioned lately as simplistic, and it failed really to explain some persistent patterns of behavior. And then there is a new branch of economics, which is called behavioral economics. You may have heard of it. And one of the leading figures is Daniel Kahneman, who is actually a psychologist. So that's psychologist, but he got the Nobel Prize for Economy, particularly for these insights, which combine psychology with economic considerations. And there is actually a vast sort of emerging literature that is growing fast. You know, you may have heard of important books or publications recently, like Nudge. You heard of Nudge by Richard Thaler and Cass Sunstein. This is a book that actually suggests that you can achieve policy impact without necessarily using hard instruments like forbidding things or mandating certain things. And actually the efficiency, the effectiveness of those instruments may be limited, but you can actually influence people's behavior more effectively just by what they call the choice architecture, the way the choice is packaged for them. Okay, and just nudging them gently into making the right decision or the socially desirable decision without forcing them. Okay. And this is applied now really seriously in the US, in the UK. In the UK, there is even a policy unit called the Behavioral Insights Team attached to the Prime Minister, Cameron. And they started facing, when Cameron came to power, there was a lot of skepticism about this. But now really they are recognized because of some specific successes that they had in terms of policy. They managed to achieve policy impact through their behaviorally informed approaches that were more effective, more cost effective also than the traditional approaches. Anyway, you may have heard of Blink, for instance, by Malcolm Gladwell. There's growing popular literature explaining sort of people's behavior that is not always rational and so on. So basically what it says is that people have cognitive and behavioral biases, and you have to keep this into account. And there are a huge number of them. Here I just listed, actually these are picked from Wikipedia. You can go there and find a huge list. But things like, for instance, the anchoring bias. We see them at work every day, which means that, you know, for instance, when you're negotiating a price, the initial reference has a big influence on you. So, depending on where you start the negotiation, that is the anchor, and you know, that influences a lot the end result. Yeah, many of them you're faced the decoy effect, for instance. That's quite interesting because you know, it works so effectively. I mean, we could even do an experiment right now and show you among yourselves how effective it is. So basically, it means that if there are two choices available, and you present them to people as such, they will tend to choose them in a certain proportion. But then if you introduce a decoy, which is something that is nobody will choose, and is there just for producing this effect, it tilts significantly the choice towards one of the options. I don't know if we really have time to take it. It's probably not so. But I've seen it applied. By the way, these things are also applied by industry. So in their marketing and advertisement campaigns. So, for instance, this example of this decoy effect, I've seen it, and it worked on me as well, applied by The Economist, for instance, which says The Economist presents you the following offer. They say you can have just the electronic edition, so just the digital edition for, let's say, 39 euro per year. is you can have the print plus electronic edition for about 120 euro per year. Now, if the choice was presented as such, honestly, I think many people would pick this one, because the people who read The Economist, they can as well do it online, or download it on their iPad and so on. So there are really reader-friendly ways to read it. You can download it in audio and listen to it in your car. So really the value of having the print, which sometimes even comes later, this is not that much. So it would definitely not justify this price difference. So if you present the choice in this way, probably a pretty high proportion of people would take this option. But what they do is they introduce a decoy. They say, well, there's another choice. It's just the print edition for 125 euro a year. I mean, obviously, who would take this when you can take this? Okay, and you get the electronic edition as bonus in the same price. So this is just a fake thing, okay? Nobody would take it. But simply putting it there shifts a lot of people to this option. And it always works. If, again, I mean, we've done this even with audiences, we divide the people by half and say, okay, you have this choice, you have this choice, and then compare the results. It's very effective. So these things really capitalize on these biases. The status quo bias, which means that people are attached, they tend to privilege the status quo, the situation as it is, rather than changing it. How can this be applied to policy? Well, it has huge policy implications. For instance, when it comes to organ donation. Okay, if you set the default being that your organs are not available for donation after your death, but then if you want to donate them, you have to sort of explicitly agree that I will donate my organs after my death. Only a very small proportion of people will do that. Really infinitesimal. But if you change the default, and you say by default, organs after death are available for donation, and you're free to pull out, you're free to opt out of this. And it's very easy, just you send a letter or you go on a website or whatever, and you tick out this box that you don't agree to donate your organs. Guess what? The proportion of people who just accept the status quo and leave it as is skyrockets. So there are a lot more organs available. And this is a policy measure that is not forced, doesn't oblige people to take a decision. It's just how the decision is presented. The EU, the Commission, applied this, for instance, in the Consumer Rights Directive, when they banned the pre-checked boxes in contracts. So you have these contracts where you are buying an air ticket, for instance. If you remember years ago, when you were buying an air ticket online, you should have been really careful to uncheck all the boxes that were just optional. They were proposing you insurance, pick your seat, whatever extra service, adding to the cost. And these were pre-checked boxes, and you could of course go through them and uncheck all of them. But then, because of the status quo bias, many people did not uncheck them. So the ban on pre-checked boxes basically means that you cannot have pre-checked boxes. You cannot set the default in the sense that would take money out of people's pockets. So the default by law now, so if you see anything like this is illegal now in the EU, the default, and actually applicable to all the companies who sell to the EU consumers, the default is you don't pay any extra. If you want to pay some extra, you have to opt in yourself. Okay, so what else do I have here? Oh, the endowment effect, like, which was also, it has different names, loss aversion, or it means that people are more adverse to losing something, or they value more something that they would lose than they would be ready to pay for it to acquire it in the first place. So that's quite interesting. So you buy something, you pay a price, let's say 10 euro for it, but then if I were, you know, the day after, if I were to take it from you, you would not give it away for 10 euro. You would ask for more. I mean, this is how it works in general, statistically. What are the policy implications? Well, think, for instance, of the crisis in the Eurozone and the policy choice that was made for the so-called internal devaluation, meaning these countries, take Greece, they don't have their own currency, so they cannot devalue their currency. So they have to nominally cut people's salaries, and that, you know, because of the endowment effect, that creates a lot of resistance. It's actually much easier to just inflate, so decrease people's salaries by inflation, while nominally they keep their own salaries, and, you know, reduce their nominal value. So all these things are relevant for, again, and the list is much longer. All these things are relevant for policymakers because they have implications on how people behave and react to different stimuli. So, considering this, I mean, again, how can you make the sustainable choices easier for people? And one of the very common biases is this, what we call being myopic, but in fact is the high time preference, which means people tend to privilege immediate gratification over the long-term consequences. There is a natural tendency to care more for now than for the future. Okay? This has big policy implications. So every time, I mean, you see this in your daily life when, you know, you could, for instance, walk or take public transportation, and instead you drive a car because it's just easier. It takes less effort, but in the long run, it's less healthy for you. It costs you more money. It doesn't help with the environment either. It creates a lot of externalities for the others as well. When you buy too much food and then end up throwing away some of it, the same, you know, you think in the present, you don't really think long term. So you have an immediate craving for something, you buy it, but then you realize you don't really need it. Or when, you know, where you overconsume energy. What can policymakers do? So policy could act as a sort of, I mean, that's the ideal. To understand these biases and to create a situation where policy would be like these binoculars, sort of make it more salient to people what are the longer term impacts of their choices. Okay, so magnify the image of what will happen in the medium and longer term. Now, of course, this also has limitations in terms of, for instance, how much information you can pass to people and to consumers. And there is this very well-known by now phenomenon of information overload, which means after a certain point, the more information you give, the less useful it is, and actually, you know, the accuracy of the choice starts declining with more and more information. And people have limited attention spans. For instance, we know that the average European spends on a shopping visit about 45 minutes. And then when it's about choosing a product, It's really about 5 seconds max. When it's about making a choice, again, but most of the time, most of the purchases are just automatic because you made a choice some time ago. So you don't even compare. You keep buying the same thing that you bought and you were reasonably happy with it. You don't you don't compare all the time. And in that case, the automatic buying is really milliseconds, sort of looking at the shelf and taking the product. So will people start reading complicated labels on sustainability, environmental performance, comparable qualities of product? No. So this information overload means that you need to be very careful what kind of information you pass to people. It has to be as simple as possible, as salient as possible, so it has to really send the message. It has to be accurate, it has to be comparable, it has to be trustworthy. Okay. And verified. So people don't trust anymore the claims of the sellers or the producers of the companies. Like, my product is environment friendly. What does this mean? Is it certified by some credible authority, or is it just your statement? Okay, so, and how can I compare it with another? We're actually using now the Commission behavioral studies to experiment, to test with various ways to present the information. What are the most effective ways that information has to be presented, and what information, in what form, at what time, to consumers, so that it really has the impact that we expect on their behavior. And how we do this, there are these randomized trials where we basically take control groups and we experiment with this kind of things. You know, it goes from environmental labeling, like CO2 emissions of cars, to energy labeling, to the pictures that you can put on cigarette packs that would be most effective in discouraging people to smoke. Okay, and one example is the energy bill. But this is, I realize it's not very readable. But the energy bill, the monthly or quarterly bill that you're getting from your energy provider, it's not just an invoice. It can be used to influence your behavior. Depending on how the information is presented there, it can alter your consumption pattern, your behavior. So this is, for instance, something that the Commission, after studying the issue and consulting with consumer organizations, industry, independent experts, has come up with. I mean, this is just a recommendation that some companies have started to use in one way or another. So what kind of information to put on the bill? Okay, so it basically, it breaks down your costs. It tells you when you consume most, how much does it cost you, how much money you could save, what can you do to save, or, if not all the information can be fit here, but then it sends you for more information to a website, or there are solutions to lower your consumption, to save money, to be efficient, and this can be a signal sent to your energy bill. And this has actually worked in practice in the US. There has been a serious application of this. On top of that, also all this consumption data, but not too detailed that you would get lost, but just the salient points for you, and that may influence your behavior. But in addition to that, in the US, they used social norms, so leveraging social norms. So basically, they introduced in the energy bill a comparison with your neighbors and with all your neighborhood and your energy efficient neighbors. So on your energy bill, where they tested this, and they tested it on a large scale in several states, so you would get the average consumption of your energy efficient neighbors in comparable conditions. I mean, they would not compare, a large family of 6 living in a big house with a young couple in an apartment. So comparable conditions, they will show you what's the best performance in your neighborhood, where you stand, and then all your neighbors. So here you see you appear as being above the average, and then you even have a smiley there saying it's good. And it explains who your neighbors are for comparison. Of course, not the names, but what type of household and so on. And this has proven to work just by packaging the information in this way. Just by that, putting this information on the bill, consumption went down by more than 2%. Just by that. So without any other measure. Okay? That's an impact. Now, of course, we are thinking of, does it work in any cultural environment? And there is an interesting discussion. What happens, for instance, if instead of being in the middle, you appear as, as being in the highest performing, energy efficient?
You should not do this for efficient.
Why?
Because they may start consuming more energy.
Yeah, so that's an interesting discussion exactly on this point. So, okay, so what happens if you're already doing better than your neighbor, much better? Will you start consuming more? So will there be this convergence towards the middle? And we think this may be related to the cultural environment. So if you have a culture where competition and performance is highly valued, maybe that's an encouragement to do even better. So you're leading the pack, so you step up your efforts because there is this culture of competition and performance. In cultures where there is more this conception of belonging to the community, of not standing out too far from the others and sort of being like the others, the effect may be opposite. So yes, the idea is this has to be tested also in different places, because it may, the cultural environment, the social norms may be different, and it may work differently. Yes,
we can fix this by maybe giving a bonus to whoever does the best.
Giving a bonus. Yes.
Something minor, to keep them going.
Yes, this has been tried. This is the obvious thing. Just give people money, or give them some tax exemptions or whatever for the sustainable choices. This is regularly applied. In some cases, it doesn't really work as you would expect. For instance, there is one example in the UK of a policy for house insulation, again launched by this government, Cameron. They call it the Green Deal, where they actually subsidize people to insulate their homes to make them more energy efficient, because many of the homes are old, like 19th century or even older England, and they are very inefficient in terms of energy. So they would subsidize them to insulate their homes. It's in their interest. they would get a subsidy, they would get a reduced energy bill, so they would benefit in the long term. They would increase the value of their house, and still the uptake was very disappointing. And they were trying to see what's the reason, why are not people taking this offer? So is it about money? Should we increase the subsidy? And that was not the answer. Actually, the solution that worked was developed in a public-private partnership with a company that is called Kingfisher. They are present in several countries in Europe. It's a do-it-yourself retailer, like Brico Store and they partnered with the government, and they did some behavioral tests and research of their own, and they came to the conclusion that it's not about the money. What people don't like is the mess that this creates, the disruption in their homes. So that you have to have works in your home, and nobody likes that. You have to pack your furniture, to vacate the room. And that was a major disruption in people's life, and they kept postponing it, and it's never the ideal moment. So what they offered, and it was much more effective than money subsidy, was, first to present it as part of house improvement. So it's not about insulation to get your house greener. No, it's about improving your home, like you would modernize your home. And then offer support for this attic, just to back in the UK, people keep their stuff in the attic, their old stuff. This is different from in some other countries. They keep it in the cellar or whatever, in some other building in their backyard or in the garage. In the UK, they keep it in the attic. And most of the insulation work had to take place there. And people were really loath of going there where they had their old stuff that they hadn't touched in decades, and just clean that mess. So they offered, we come and clean that mess for you. And that actually, they recouped their cost even from the government subsidy. So people were willing to give up money just to have, and the uptake rate has increased threefold just by doing that. So it's a different approach. And the money doesn't always work. Like, there was a case in Switzerland about a site to create a site for storing nuclear waste near a community. And people in the community were not very much in favor of this. So they ran some opinion polls, and then they thought, but what if we compensate them and we give them some monetary incentive? So we say, if you accept this nuclear waste site, just to get deep into the ground near your place, you'll get some amount of money. Guess what? The people actually became even more hostile to it. Why? How can you explain that? Behavior, you can explain it with the bias. So basically, the explanation that was given was that, once you commodify this, so they perceive it as like a barrier has been passed, and their safety is something that has been commodified and accounted for in monetary terms. So they were more willing to accept it without the compensation than with the compensation, just because their safety was not something to be traded. See, so yes, often the monetary incentives work, but things are not that simple, and this is actually where all this, the monetary incentives would always work if we assume that this classic model of the consumer is valid. The rational, self-interested, the informed consumer always compares information and makes the rational choice. But it's not like that. Also, social norms, like other example is, and this is from a hotel in Copenhagen report. Rather than, in the bathrooms, always or often you see these notices that, please help us save water and reduce pollution by reusing your towel, and if you accept to reuse your towel, keep it on the rack, otherwise put it down. But rather than doing this in this hotel in Copenhagen, they were actually using the social norm or the peer pressure. They weren't saying, help us save the planet. They were saying, 8 of 10 guests reuse their towel. And that's it. And it worked quite effectively. Because, okay, so why should I be among the other two who are so reckless that they would not reuse their towel? How can you make this the sustainable choice also fun? I saw a great example in Stockholm, I think it was, and it's on YouTube. You can search it. Where just to encourage people, so there was an escalator, and then there were stairs. I think it was at a metro station. Just to encourage people to take the stairs, which is more energy efficient and a lot healthier for them. Actually, this is not a joke. Taking stairs rather than elevators or escalators increases your lifespan tremendously and makes you a lot healthier. So it was calculated, for instance, that in the States, where they had this obesity epidemic, actually that would almost totally be erased completely if people would just take the stairs most of the time rather than taking the elevators. So what they did is, in Stockholm, these stairs, they made them like piano keys. So when you were stepping on them, there were sounds like a piano. Dun, 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 dun. And that by itself increased, the number, the proportion of people who went to took the stairs rather than the escalator, doubled overnight. And then those who took the escalator were already looking remorseful and looking at, the fun that the others had. So there are ways to do it cleverly, and we're trying now. Actually, in my workplace at DG Sanko, we want to experiment to make a test on actually encouraging people to use the stairs. Okay, one of the problems is they are not well signaled. So, it happened to me several times. I wanted to take the stairs, but it was not obvious where I should go. They are labeled as emergency exits, and then you take the stairs and you realize you got stuck at some other floor and you cannot continue. I mean, it's quite chaotic, so it's not well signaled. But then, as well, we saw an experiment in the States of just placing a label or an announcement next to the elevator, just saying something that, if you take the stairs, you increase your lifespan, something like that, had an immediate effect on the number. So we're trying to experiment this now. We're thinking of what kind of announcements to post near the elevators and improving the signaling. And then we also have to collect the hard data on the elevators usage and so on, and we'll conduct also some surveys. But so there is a lot of potential just making it easier for people to do the right thing without forcing them to do it. I mean, that's the whole insight of behavioral economics. Okay. Now, green labels. Okay, how can people, okay, so let's assume they want to make the good choice. How can they make it? How can you help them? Is the inflation of green labels helpful? Arguably not. On the contrary, this is distinctly unhelpful. So now, you see all kinds of labels. This is good for the environment, this is green, this is energy efficient. Yes.
No, just an addition. There is this TED talk about too many choices in our postmodern society. And the results of the experiment was that if you have too many choices and you're too confused, you end up not choosing, which in this case means staying with the old product, which is probably not green.
Yeah. It was actually in this list that I put of behavioral biases. One of them was this one. I think it was called the ambiguity bias. So if it becomes too complicated, and if there is too much choice, then you refuse choosing. You postpone. Yeah. So correct. So it becomes counterproductive. There's this crowding out effect. So the same for this. I mean, how can these are? By the way, this is very chaotic. Some of them are, voluntary labeling schemes by the industry. Like they agree on a charter and they adhere to some standards, and then they put a label. So private initiatives. Some of them are just company specific. Big companies, they say, well, we have our own standards. So we label this as green because we know it's green, and we have our internal data to show that. Some of them are from regulators, okay, like the European Commission or national authorities and so on. The issue with many of them is their credibility. Who guarantees for it, on what basis? And then, of course, comparability. I mean, what does it mean, for instance, that a product has this label, planet positive? I don't know. I mean, would I choose one with this over one with CO2 star? No, of course, some of them apply to different product categories, but still, within one product category, there is often an inflation of green labeling. But this thing that in addition to this, you also have trust marks, you have quality certificates or labels and so on. So again, when you buy almost anything, you see there are a number of symbols on it, which every one of them means something. So this inflation of labeling actually creates a significant risk of what we call greenwashing, meaning, companies just make some claims, but they cannot really support them, or those claims are not credible. And this is something that, okay, has affected the credibility. Again, here we have some data from the US, which we're trying to corroborate now with the data from the EU, and we're surveying consumers about their understanding of green labels and their trust in green labels. But basically, in the US, what was found was that there's no understanding, very little or inaccurate understanding of what these labels mean. Where they get their information, most of them from other consumers, so that shows lack of trust in the claims. And deep skepticism of company-driven marketing. In Europe, actually, we don't have any umbrella regulation specifically targeted at the green claims. There are things on very specific sectors, like labeling of car tires. From November of this year, car tires will be also labeled in terms of fuel efficiency when driving a car, but also in terms of their environmental footprint in being produced and so on. There are these energy labels on home appliances and so on. So on very specific issues, there are some regulations, but in general on green claims, the only instrument that we have right now is this Unfair Commercial Practices Directive, which basically says, qualifies as illegal some commercial practices by companies, like misleading advertisement and so on. And in the guidance to it, not in the text itself of the directive, there is something about the green claims in general, and basically it identifies two possible situations: the so-called objective misleading practice, where simply there is false information being given. For instance, calling biodegradable something that is not biodegradable or has not been proven to be. And then subjective misleading practice, which is, covers situations like even using green symbols or context to advertise a product that is not green by its nature. For instance, advertising a car in a forest. Guess what? That's illegal in the EU. So if that induces the idea that the car is environmental friendly, unless you can really prove and have the data to justify the claim. But that just using it is not, if you use it, you have to be able to justify. Or, claiming, for instance, that the washing machine, a new model of washing machine reduces water usage by 75%, when this is only obtained in laboratory conditions, and in actual usage maybe it reduces by just 25%. So they should advertise what it happens in actual usage, not laboratory conditions. And then this is I think the last point I'm going to touch on. Food waste. Again, as I was just focusing on some issues because the domain is really vast. But food waste, we have some data. There was an exploratory study in 2010 in the EU, which found that, this data is not rock solid, but it's a good indication. So we have some question marks on some of it. But basically, it was found that the food waste amounts to approximately 89 million tons in the EU per year, which is about 180 kilograms per capita per year. And over 42% of this is generated by households, meaning food that you buy and then you throw out. Okay. And then you see, manufacturing sector is producing also a large amount, also in the retail sector. So the food that by the end of the day is no longer suitable is taken off the shelf and discarded. The catering services and so on. In terms of greenhouse gases emissions, the impact of household food waste is estimated at 78 million tons of CO2 equivalent, 45% of the total emissions due to the food waste, which means that, and especially the household part, in the supply chain, there are parts which you can not easily change or reduce because they are related to the current economic setup, the business models that are in operation. And that's another discussion whether, how to move towards more sustainable business models. And I could open a large parenthesis on this, but I will not. But anyway, the idea is that's on the supply side. But on the consumer side, this household food waste can be quite easily reduced, and that would by itself amount at a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the EU by almost 1%, just by significantly reducing the food waste at the household level. Now I'll give you a quiz to see how informed consumers you are in terms of food waste and food in general. So today we are, 11th of July. Can this product be consumed today? It's a canned product, obviously. So if you were served with it today, would you eat it? How many people would eat it?
No.
Nobody? Why?
This says best before the other people.
Okay.
But it's already July. So probably it's spoiled.
Maybe it's the date of production.
No, BB means best before.
Best before.
But best before doesn't mean it's expired, so you can eat it. Just replace date to eat it before whatever April, but you can still eat it after.
Okay.
It's not expiry date.
So your answer was okay because you understood what it means, what BB means. But actually he's right. Best before creates a lot of confusion because it doesn't mean the product is unsafe after that date. It just means, you know, maybe it tastes better before, or they guarantee that, you know, it has the best qualities before that date, but it in no way does it mean that it is unsafe after that date. And actually the answer is, it depends. Depends on the product. So if it's something canned, very likely it's perfectly safe to eat now. If it's best before and later. Very likely. So you just have to look at it, to smell it. If nothing seems wrong, yeah, it's okay. Yeah.
This one is when do you use it? In my content, we just say expired date.
Yes. That's also a very valid question. There are people in the policy discussions currently in the EU who say we should forbid this best before altogether. This is just a trap, and it had a lot of negative consequences in terms of food waste, because people tend to interpret it as expiry date, which is not. Okay.
How did you adopt this best before? What was it for you? It's not expired date. So what was it?
It's a cheating everything.
It relates to simply marketing strategies. Now, there is one, I said I would not open a parenthesis on the supply side, but I will now, and I'll try to keep it short. Have you heard of, there is a movie on a documentary, which is also available on YouTube. It created quite a stir in 2010. The popular name, it's the light bulb conspiracy. Have you heard of it? Okay. The light bulb conspiracy. I think the actual name is different, but it is widely known under this name. So look for it and watch it on YouTube. So basically, I mean, this has created a lot of stir, and even today we're getting questions almost on a monthly basis from the European Parliament to the Commission that we have to answer, still prompted by this movie and then other reports that, you know. So basically what this movie is saying is that the industry has developed a model and has imposed a model of production and consumption designed to maximize consumption. Okay? And they have some very specific examples, like printers who buy, you know, from their manufacturing, they are set up to only work for a certain number of copies. And then there is a sort of microprocessor there is some instruction that blocks them after that to force you to buy a new one. The light bulb example is that, you know, in the 20s and 30s, I think, the light bulb producers came together and they agreed to reduce the lifespan of a light bulb. Simply that. So it used to be higher, and actually there was even an invention of a light bulb that is still in function after 100 years. It was never produced on a large scale, but it's still, the light bulb exists. It has more than 100 years, it still works. So the light bulbs are not, you know, condemned to only work for a certain time. But then there was a conscious decision by producers. Why? Because in this way they could keep on producing and selling to people. So it's a matter of model. When something breaks nowadays in your printer, for instance, and you go to the repair shop, first of all, there's no repair shop, or if there is, they would charge you such an outrageous amount that it actually encourages you to just discard the old printer and buy a new one. That's how the model works. Some of us still lived, looking at, not you, Andre and I, lived under communism. That was a society of scarcity. You would not, when something broke down, you would not buy a new one. You would repair it. There were repair shops for everything, including shoes. Everything was repaired. But not only that, the production was, and I'm not, don't understand that I'm trying to make the apology of communism here, so I don't want to create this impression. But it's just that the model was different, because this consumption society is something that was invented in the West at a specific point in time. And it only came to our part of the world after 1990. But remember, the Russian products, the Soviet products, had a renown for durability.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, they were lasting forever. So they would never, or they could be repaired and then they would continue again forever. So this is not something that, you know, nowadays most of the products are done in such a way so as not to last too long, to force you back. And this has many aspects. For instance, toothpaste. You know, they own design, producers just enlarged the hole on the toothpaste because it shows that you consume more in this way. You know, so someone just invented this brilliant idea. He said, you know how you can increase your profits? No, just make the hole larger. And it worked. Or, you know, female stockings. You know, at some point, again, there were stockings that were lasting forever, and they decided just not to produce them anymore because it was not good for business. It's, you know, the thing is, you cannot just blame the company. This is called planned obsolescence, and we get questions from. Recently, we had a question from Parliament about computer software, and they say, why is it that they keep producing unnecessarily sophisticated software that always demands more and more resources, actually to force you to discard your old hardware and buy new hardware as well. And I'm facing the same situation. I have a laptop at home that is like 7-8 years old, and already I have problems with some of the software. So I have to look for old versions of the same software. They are still kept on some sites and so on. So, but then again, every now and then they try to automatically update themselves, and the updated ones don't work with my hardware. But the old ones work perfectly fine and have exactly the same. So there is an issue, okay? It's not to blame necessarily the companies. The system is such, the incentives are such that they encourage this kind of unsustainable, including this planned obsolescence. So if you ask me, that this best before date is a symptom of the same. You don't necessarily need a best before date. You need an expiry date, yes. Okay. Now, the point I wanted to make with this one, yes. Can you, so here it says explicitly best before, and November 2012. Can you eat it today? Yes?
If it's stored in a cool
Right,
yes.
right. So use your common sense. It depends. Like it depends here, it also depends here. I've seen many products rotten which were within their validity period. Why? Because they were not stored as they should have been stored. There are many reasons, possible reasons. So just, you know, use your common sense and don't think that just because a date is put there, you know, the next day it's, you know, it's just the product gets rotten at midnight between the day. This is an example of use by. So most consumers in the EU and in general, in US, they just don't distinguish between best before and use by. Use by is the validity. So in principle, safety of the product, assuming it was stored in the right conditions, that's hugely important. the safety of the product is only guaranteed by the producers up to the use by date. So if you eat that egg today, you're on your own risk. So don't blame the producer. So he doesn't, it may be safe. I mean, I remember when I was a kid in the countryside, my grandmother was storing eggs. So she had hens, and she was storing eggs for months. And not in the fridge, believe me. She was putting them in some dark place. And she was storing them for months, and then she was, every now and then, you want an egg, she was picking an egg from there. And I survived. So it's not to say that it's unsafe. It's just that the producer doesn't assume responsibility after that. Okay, I think it's quite... Now, yes, there are voices who say we should get rid of the best before date because it's confusing. Just keep the use by date. Because what happens is that the best before date gets confused with the use by date. That is a major reason for food waste. And actually what you can do, the Commission even came up with some hints of how to reduce food waste at home. And many of them are just commonsensical. For instance, when shopping, make a shopping list before going to shopping. Plan your shopping. Because if you don't do that, so before going to a shopping visit to the supermarket, just check your fridge and make a list. Because it is demonstrated that if you don't do that, you end up buying unnecessary things that you have to throw out afterwards. Or check constantly the validity dates, the use by and the best before dates. And in your cupboard or your fridge, whatever, put the products that are about to expire closer, in front, and then put the other ones in the back. Because what usually happens is, has happened to everyone, you suddenly realize you search in your fridge and you go, oh, this has been here for 2 months, I forgot about it. Also, when buying, try not to buy, packaged large quantities, as usually is. If you have the option, buy smaller quantities. There is one commercial practice in many supermarkets, which is to bundle things together. You say, you buy one eggplant, you get one for free. Okay. You maybe don't need 2 eggplants, you just need one. But you will not say no to the one that is given for free, so you take it and then you end up throwing it away. So there is now a discussion between, that we're trying to facilitate with some supermarkets and the consumer organizations to say, okay, you get one for free, but you don't have to take it now. You can come back for it later, some other day. Just to, not to produce. I mean, this is artificially produced food waste. Okay, so they force you to buy something, or they encourage you to buy something that you don't need. It's for them. It's in line with their business model. It's good for business in the very short-term perspective, but obviously it's not good for the planet and for all of us. Okay, serve small portions. I mean, again, these are pretty common sense. So, yeah, I'm right in time, but I'm willing to take questions or comments or. Yeah.
Thank you. Please. Thank you, Don.
I would like to ask the two have people learned from the crisis? Can it be measured in their consumer behavior in longer term? So I don't mean that as they have less money, they don't consume that much, but in a more deeper way. Is there any change in their consumer behavior?
I show some data, and we're trying to look in more depth. So we have very rough data, which shows that consumers have not lost their appetite for sustainable consumption. So we think there is a lot of potential if the information was clearer, if the right incentives were there, and so on. It's actually very difficult. One of the problems that we're facing in the policy context of EU is that you cannot really today advocate for reduced consumption. It's a no-go, because everything has to be to serve growth. That's the political objective. Everybody is so desperate to get out of this economic crisis. So we got very firm orders, all the Commission. Nothing can be done, no new initiative, unless it is proven to help growth. So it's very difficult to argue for less consumption, but what you have to do is to argue for different patterns of consumption. Okay, and which say, I mean, you can also use the crisis, the context of crisis, to advocate for cost cutting when companies are trying to reduce their costs. So if you can come up with sustainable solutions that also